The knocking was barely loud enough to pull me out of my sleep. With my eyes drooping from tiredness, I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 3:33 a.m. Who the hell was at my door at 3 in the morning? With my back still hurting from the unpacking at this new apartment, I got up and slowly walked to my door. The white painted wooden door looked as if placed in the spotlight by the moonlight coming from the window. I swing open the door and no one. Whoever decided to break my sleep in the night was already gone. Maybe a drunk neighbor knocked on the wrong door before realizing their mistake. Who knows? I closed the door and retired back to my cozy sleep. You can't blame me for not suspecting more. How could I have known the knocking would come back the next night? Knock, knock, knock. The knocking came back, breaking my sleep yet again. My eyes shot open and I checked my phone in frustration. 3:33 a.m. I'd had a terrible day, so naturally I stomped furiously out of the bedroom toward my door. This is my second day in this bloody place, and you all can't even let me sleep. I swing open the door with a frown visible on my face. There was no one. Of course. I grunted, locked the door, and after mourning my interrupted sleep, decided to hit the bed again. The knocking continued for another 3 days, leaving me restless each night. It was the same thing at the same time each night, 3 knocks at 3:33 a.m. The constant commotion had robbed me of sleep and my exhaustion festered into anger. I was going to find out who was doing this. So I sat on my sofa all night waiting for 3:33 a.m. By the time the clock hit it, I was struggling to keep my eyes open with all the willpower I had. As soon as the clock hit 3:33, I jumped up, ran to the door with all the anger that had piled up through the nights and swung open the door yet again, to an empty hallway. "Motherfucker lucked out today," I whispered, and then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. But this time the knocking did not come from the main door. It came from behind me. My body grew cold and my anger was replaced with a realization that made my spine shiver. Slowly and unwillingly I turned around. The knocking had come from my bedroom door, which was shut close. Was someone in my bedroom? Was I in danger? What should I do? Should I call the cops? All the adrenaline pumped by my anger had dried out while I contemplated what to do. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I asked loudly. When no answer came back, I slowly went and turned the doorknob of my bedroom. As the door squeakily opened, it revealed my bedroom with someone in it. All my blood dried and I stared at the person laying in my bed, unable to move a muscle as if I were in sleep paralysis. The person was me. I watched my mangled body with its blood-red eyes and mouth that was frozen in its scream, and then the door flew shut in my face, knocking me back on the living room floor. My eyes swelled up and I curled into a little ball and cried for the remainder of the night, unable to process the fact that I just saw my very own dead body. I must have dozed off because the next thing was me waking up the next night. With a dried mouth and tired eyes, I crawled my way to my phone in the living room and checked the time. I was a minute early. I waited for a minute until 3:33 a.m. hit. Knock, knock, knock. Even though I was curled up just in front of the main door, I couldn't muster the courage to open it. But then it flew open, showing me the empty hallway. I kept staring at the empty hallway and after a while noticed that the roof had a person stuck to it. And then without warning, the figure dropped with a loud thud. I screamed and cried as I saw the person was my body. Laying on the floor, it looked at me with its dead eyes that bled tears of blood. "Please stop," I cried. It did not stop, though. Every night I pass out from exhaustion after crying, only to wake moments before the inevitable knock. I don't eat or drink anymore. What's the point? The knocks have shown me so many ways that I can die, each one worse than the last. I can't take this anymore. I want to escape, but the doors won't let me. I am writing this at 3:30 a.m., only 3 minutes until the knocking shows another death of me. I just wish this time it kills me for real, because I am scared. I am scared that this is going to continue forever. For a long time, I started getting 911 calls that didn't happen yet. Horrifying events that didn't happen yet. The worst part was knowing that it's going to happen before it does. Placing the phone to my ear and not knowing for certain what to expect, I managed a meek, "Hello?" A voice on the other end responded. They sounded very young, likely a child. "Hello, is this 911? We need help. We got in a big car accident, and Mommy and Daddy are not moving. I think they are really hurt. Please help." My heart sank. I started to panic. I did not know if this was really happening or was going to happen like the other call. Whatever the case, this kid's parents were seriously injured or worse. I couldn't exactly call 911 myself and tell them that something bad somewhere was going to happen. I resolved to get as much information from the terrified child on the phone as possible. Maybe then I could do something about it, whatever that might be. I heard crying on the line, and I spoke slowly and clearly to try and reassure the poor thing that help would arrive, just not in the way she likely expected. "I know this is scary, but I promise I'm going to try and help. What is your name and your parents' names?" The crying abated slightly, and the trembling reply was, "Chloe, my name is Chloe. My parents are Richard and Abigail." "That is great, Chloe, thank you. And what is your last name?" "It's Keller." I was grateful she was old enough to know their family surname. "Thank you, Chloe. Can you tell me what happened? How did your mommy and daddy get hurt? What happened with the car accident? Did your car hit something? Or did someone hit your family's car?" "We were just driving down the road, and we were waiting at a red light, and as soon as it turned green and we started going again, a silver car hit us on the side and knocked our car over, and it sped off." I heard more crying, and I tried to speed up the questioning without pressuring her. I didn't know how long I had. "Do you know what type of car your family has? What color of car is it, and what is the brand name on the back?" There was brief hesitation, and then she spoke again. "It is a red car. I think the label says it is a toy something, Toyota. I don't know anything else, that is just what the label says." Red Toyota was something to go on, at least, though I had wished I had the model as well. I did not bother asking for the plate number. I doubted she would know or be able to check that. "Thank you, Chloe. You are being so brave. Now can you see where you are? Are you able to see any road signs to help find where you and your family are?" I hoped she was able to see something to help find them. I had a terrible feeling that if this was somewhere rural, I might not be able to find wherever it was happening. "I think I see a sign. I can't get out of the car, I am stuck. It is getting hard to see, there is smoke everywhere. I think I can see a sign by the light we were passing. It says Bishop or Bishop or something, I can't tell from here. Please, it is getting hard to breathe in here." I was dreading the implication of what she said last. If there was a fire and she was stuck in that vehicle and no one was around to help, she would not have much time. "Okay, that is great. Can you see another sign or anything else that can help locate you and your mommy and daddy?" She started to speak again, but went into a coughing fit that lasted for several seconds. She managed to start again. "I don't see another street sign, but there is a bus stop or something near the road. I think I see a number 18 on it. I think... Oh no, help. The car is on fire now. Help. Please. Help." Static assaulted my eardrums as I lowered the phone in an anxiety-fueled stupor. The phone was dead again, of course. No indication it had just answered a call from a terrified little girl in the future. I had to do something. I had no idea if it was really going to happen twice. I would not take any chances, though. I hoped that the call came from within the city limits, otherwise it could be anywhere, and the chance of finding the right street and getting there on time tomorrow was near impossible. I looked up the municipal bus routes and tried to find a bus stop or route marked 18. With a little map work, I was able to locate it, and sure enough, it was right near the streetlight and intersection of Bishop Street and Mullen Avenue. I had my location, or so I thought. Now I just needed to know when it was going to happen. I realized I forgot to ask what time it was when I was asking for details. I checked the phone just in case it had a timestamp from the call, but it would not display anything. My hunch was that since the call yesterday came later in the evening and the actual event occurred at a similar time of night, that the emergencies that correspond to the calls occurred at the same time, just on the subsequent day. I did not want to risk it in case I was wrong, so I resolved to take the next day off of work and get to that intersection and go on a stakeout and wait. I got there at around 6 in the morning and parked on the curb, near the bus stop, but not blocking it. It was going to be a long day, but I tried to remain alert and vigilant. As I had expected, nothing happened in the morning or afternoon. I was about to conclude my theory as correct and expect the accident to occur near 10 o'clock in the evening, based on the time of the previous call. It was 4:42 in the afternoon, and I was about to step out of the car to find a nearby public restroom, since I had been sitting there for so long. Suddenly the phone sprang to life with that eerie chime. I looked at the road frantically for a red Toyota. The phone kept ringing, and I realized it might not be related to this instance. It might be a different emergency call. I answered, and I heard a new desperate voice begging for help. "Hello, 911. My name is Stacy Thomas. I am at the rest stop on exit 112, and we need ambulance and police here right now. A woman has been assaulted, and she is in bad shape. I think she is still alive, but I don't know. Please send someone." It was another one. I had to get more information. "All right, Miss Thomas, did you see anything happen, or did you just find this woman?" I was driving on the interstate and stopped to use the restroom. When I got to the woman's room, there was an out-of-order sign in front, but I heard a cry for help and found a woman who was battered and barely conscious inside. "I don't know what happened, but we need help here now." I considered how I could ask for more details without sounding strange and upsetting the woman on the phone. "All right, I promise help will arrive. Would you please tell me if the woman has an ID on her to identify? Also, if she has any keys on her, would you be able to tell what car she has parked there, if it is still there?" There was an audible hesitation, and I figured she was considering the odd question. Isn't that something the police can do when they get here? We need help now. She is barely holding on. This is a medical emergency as well. Can't the police investigate? It was a fair question, and I could tell she was getting impatient, so I was considering how to rephrase it to emphasize the importance of the detail, when to my shock and horror, I heard the audible static that signaled the end of the divining phone call. "Hello? Hell? Oh, are still there." 5 more seconds of loud static, and the phone was dead. I wrote down all of the details I had for that call. They would have to do. I figured at least I had a location and a general time, though the call was after it happened, so I would have to get there early enough to try and stop it. I wrote down my game plan for tomorrow in my notebook. After my deliberation, I noticed it was starting to get dark outside, and I had to focus on the accident that was going to happen that day. One emergency at a time, I figured. It was getting closer to 10, and I was on high alert. I still did not know what I was going to do to stop the accident. When it was just a few minutes before 10, I got out of my car and walked up to the light. I was just going to have to get their attention when I saw them, and hopefully stop them from crossing at the fateful moment. Sure enough, just a few minutes after 10, a red Toyota Corolla was heading towards the light and came to a stop. I looked in and saw a man driving the car with a woman in the passenger's seat and a child in the back seat. I tried to flag them down, but they may have thought I was a panhandler, and the father ignored my attempts at getting their attention. My heart was racing. The light was about to change to green, and I knew in my gut it was going to happen. I decided to do something crazy, and I leapt into the road, directly blocking the car from going any further. The father scowled and started honking the horn at me, and the mother had a concerned, almost pitying look on her face. I realized I probably looked crazy to them, but I had to try and stop them from going at just that moment. I looked behind me, and the light turned green. Nothing happened, and when I did not see a speeding car immediately, I started to doubt myself. The father looked angry now and was unbuckling his seatbelt, probably to get out and throw me off of the road. He never got the chance. I felt the air pressure and wind blast from a speeding car behind me, and a load crash and strangled scream rang out. I looked behind, and a silver sedan was speeding away from the intersection, trailing blood in its wake. I did not know what it was, but something seemed familiar about that car. I realized in sudden horror that I had seen it before. It was the young couple's car from the night before. It had been stolen, and the carjacker was still in possession of it. Before I could make sense of the horrible connection, I realized that despite saving the family in the car, someone else had not been so lucky. A cyclist had been crossing the road at the same time and was apparently struck by the speeding car instead of the family. I was stunned by the damage that had been done. The man on the bike was torn up and was very likely dead already. I could not process what I was seeing, but I heard a voice shouting in the dim periphery of my senses. "Richard, call 911. We need help. Someone hit that man." Chloe's parents stepped out of the car and told her to stay inside. She regarded me as I back away, and I saw the couple near the body of the biker, calling the real emergency services. I backed up with a confused mix of emotions. I had saved the young family, but it had led to that cyclist being stuck instead. As I stood there in a daze, my phone vibrated, and I noticed I had another message. I steadied my trembling hands and read it. "Very utilitarian of you. You saved 3 by sacrificing 1. You are doing better, but not quite there. Keep it up and don't disappoint me. Mum." I had no idea how to feel. I thought I could save them, and I did, but at the cost of someone else. I could not figure out why this was happening to me. Why was I chosen? I felt confused and numb, but I had to put those feelings aside. Another crisis had to be resolved, as I had to prepare to handle the other call from tomorrow, today. I'm a police officer who quit after a paranormal experience. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that paranormal stuff. I used to think everything had a logical explanation, and nothing could scare me off the job. But after that night, things changed, and I want to share my story because, frankly, it still keeps me up at night. The department didn't classify this as confidential, so I can tell you everything. Just know, this isn't some simple ghost story. It's what drove me to quit the job I thought I'd do forever. It all started with a standard noise complaint in a quiet neighborhood. It was the dead of night, just past midnight. Me and my partner, let's call him Paul, were dispatched to check out the call. The street was empty, and everything was still. We parked out front of the house in question, and there wasn't a single light on inside. Paul and I got out of the car, knocked on the door, and announced ourselves. "Police, anyone home?" The door creaked open, and a little girl, probably no older than 8 or 10, peered out. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching to make myself less intimidating. "Are your parents home?" She shook her head, silently. At first I thought maybe the TV had been too loud and upset the neighbors. I was about to tell her to turn it down and go back inside when I heard the sound of silverware clattering from inside the house. Something wasn't right. The girl was alone, but someone, or something, had made that noise. I asked her to step outside, turned to Paul and said, "Why don't you give her one of those lollipops you always carry when you're nervous?" Paul gave me a side eye, but the girl giggled as they walked back toward the patrol car. Meanwhile, I called out again, "Police, if anyone is in this house, make yourself known." I pushed the door open a little more, but it was too dark to see inside clearly. Without a warrant, I had no reason to search the house. But the uneasy feeling in my gut told me something was wrong. I went back outside and knelt beside the girl. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Maribel," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name. Maribel, do you know where your family is?" Just as I finished the question, the TV inside the house blared to life. The volume cranked all the way up, blasting static. Me and Paul jumped. That's when we decided to put Maribel in the back of the patrol car for her safety. Despite our better judgment, we entered the house. The lights didn't work, no matter how many switches we flipped. As we cautiously moved through the house, I kept catching glimpses of what I thought was Paul in the mirrors, except every time I turned to look at him, he wasn't behind me. It was unsettling. Suddenly, loud, rapid footsteps echoed down the hallway. Paul and I immediately drew our guns, aiming toward the noise, but no one was there. Chairs and lamps started flying across the room like they were being thrown by an invisible force. The footsteps pounded closer, but still, we couldn't see anyone. We bolted out of the house and stood in the front yard, catching our breath. Just then, the police car siren went off, blaring through the night. I sprinted to the car to shut it off and checked on Maribel. She was fine, just sitting there quietly, but the eerie feeling was creeping up on me again. Paul walked over, looking pale. "You all right?" I asked. He popped a lollipop into his mouth, nodded, and said, "Yep." Then he dropped a bombshell. "Mike, did you notice something about the family photos in the house?" He gestured toward Maribel. "She's not in any of them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's not a single picture of her inside. And the footsteps, they led outside. Then the siren goes off. Do you think that's a coincidence?" "So you're saying, what? That Maribel's haunted?" Paul shook his head, frustrated. "Think about it. The TV turns on the moment we take her outside. We see figures in the mirrors, but nothing in real life. Something's trying to get to her." I couldn't deny the chill crawling up my spine. It all lined up too well, and the house didn't feel right. Against every bit of common sense, Paul walked back inside. "Paul, what are you doing?" "It only shows up in the mirrors," he said, smashing one with a book. He handed me a shard of glass. "Come on, let's find this thing." We scanned the house using the broken mirror pieces as makeshift viewfinders. And that's when it happened. Something red and bony reached out from the reflection, slashing through my uniform and clawing at my back. I dropped the mirror shard and screamed as the thing tore at me, only stopping when Paul fired his gun. The creature screeched and vanished into thin air. We bolted outside, but Maribel was gone. Trying to explain what happened to the department was a nightmare. Every word felt crazier than the last. And to make matters worse, the police cameras we had in the house, they had all cut off the moment we walked in. There was only one thing the captain took seriously: Maribel. He pulled up a missing person report. The girl we saw that night. She was listed as missing for years. I handed in my badge a few days later. I couldn't keep going after that night, and now I need you all to listen closely. The next time a door opens on its own, or objects start moving without explanation in your home, check the mirrors. I worked at a Halloween store that sells cursed costumes, and to this day, I wish I never set foot in that forsaken place. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was just a high school kid, barely scraping by, looking for a simple part-time job. Something easy, something that wouldn't follow me home at night. But life has a sick sense of humor, and now every night I wake up drenched in sweat, hearing the echoes of the screams that still haunt me. It all started innocently enough. It was early September, and I needed money. Nothing fancy, just enough to avoid begging my parents for cash every weekend. I applied to grocery stores, arcades, anywhere that seemed like an easy gig. But the rejection emails piled up like dead leaves on a sidewalk. It was already getting dark that evening, and I was about to give up when I decided to take a shortcut through the old abandoned mall. I figured, why not? It would save me time. The place was practically a ghost town. Every store was long since boarded up, The only sounds were the faint hum of dying lights and the echo of my footsteps on the cracked tile floors. And then, in the heart of that decaying monument to consumerism, I saw it. A Halloween store, right in the center of the mall. I froze. Now, it wasn't unusual to see Halloween pop-up stores around that time of year, but this one, something was off. The neon sign above the door flickered violently, buzzing like a swarm of angry hornets. It read, "The Halloween Hut, 'tis the season to dress your worse." The slogan was stupid, but that wasn't what bothered me. It was the way the store seemed to hum with a life of its own, the way the lights inside flickered just a bit too much, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance and slither across the floor. I stood there for a moment, staring, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread creep up my spine. But I was desperate for a job, so I shoved that feeling down and walked inside. An older man sat behind the counter, staring off into space as if the world had already forgotten him. The place smelled musty, like old cardboard boxes left to rot, mixed with the faint, sickly sweet scent of decaying fabric. I asked if they were hiring, my voice cracking slightly from nerves. He nodded, barely looking at me, and pointed toward a small "Help Wanted" sign taped to the counter. I filled out the application and 2 weeks later found myself working the weekend shift. I didn't expect much from the job. I figured it would be boring, with the occasional kid dragging their parents in to buy a cheap mask or fake blood. I didn't realize how wrong I was, how terrifyingly wrong. It started out normal enough. I sat behind the counter, scrolling through my phone and mindlessly chewing on a piece of gum. The store was empty, save for a few dusty mannequins dressed in half-assed pirate and vampire costumes. I could hear the dull hum of the fluorescent lights above, flickering like they always did, casting eerie shadows that danced across the racks of costumes. Then, the bell over the door jingled, and I looked up to see a woman and her 2 kids walk in. They seemed normal enough. A mom in her mid-30s, probably exhausted from dragging her children around all day, and 2 kids who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. The kids ran straight toward the children's costumes, chattering excitedly. The mom asked where they were, and I pointed them toward the far corner of the store. For a few minutes, everything was fine. I went back to scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention. But then, something nagged at me. A rule my boss had told me on my first day suddenly surfaced in my mind. One that I hadn't really paid much attention to at the time. Never let anyone try on the costumes. I stood up, feeling a strange weight settle in my stomach. I started walking toward the kids, planning to politely tell them to stick to browsing. As I rounded the corner, though, I froze. There, on the floor, was the mother. But she wasn't just lying there. Her body was twisted in unnatural angles, her face frozen in a mask of pure terror. Blood pooled around her, soaking into the dirty carpet beneath her, and standing over her, gnawing on her flesh, was a werewolf. Not a kid in a werewolf costume, not some cheap rubber mask with fake fur glued to it. No, this thing was real. Its fur was matted and dark, its jaws smeared with blood, and its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. It was feasting on her, tearing at her body like she was nothing more than prey. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could scream, the thing looked up. Its mouth curled into a snarl, exposing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. For a split second, I thought maybe I could outrun it. But then it lunged. I turned and bolted, but before I could make it out the door, something else blocked my path. A woman. No, not a woman. A witch. Tall and grotesque, with sunken eyes and a tattered cloak. She raised her hand, and with a flick of her wand, I was thrown backward, crashing into a rack of costumes. I scrambled to my feet, But before I could get up, the werewolf was on me. Its teeth sank into my shoulder, and I let out a scream that echoed through the empty store. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I shoved it away with all my strength, kicking it in the gut, and then knocked the witch into a pile of costumes before staggering out the door. I ran as fast as I could, my shoulder bleeding, my head spinning, until I finally made it home. I called the cops, but when they arrived at the mall, there was no store, no Halloween hut, no blood, no costumes. The mall was as empty and desolate as it had always been. They told me I'd probably been attacked by a rabid dog, that the shock had made me hallucinate the rest. My parents believed them. Hell, for a while, I almost believed them too. But then today, I saw it again. I was walking down my usual block, passing the old movie theater when I saw it. The Halloween hut. The same flickering neon sign, the same decrepit store that shouldn't exist. And out walked a man, holding his young daughter's hand. She clutched a spider costume in her arms, and I felt my blood run cold. I wanted to scream at him, to warn him, to tell him to run and never look back. But I couldn't. My throat seized up, my legs felt like lead, and all I could do was stand there, watching them disappear into the distance. I knew what was going to happen. They never believe you, not until it's too late, and by the time they realize, the curse has already taken root. The costumes aren't just cursed, they're alive. They hunger, they thirst. They take over whoever wears them, transforming them into grotesque, nightmarish versions of themselves. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The bite on my shoulder, it's changing. The skin around it is starting to itch and burn. I can feel something crawling beneath the surface, something growing. And at night, I hear the howls. They're getting louder, closer. It's only a matter of time before I'm one of them. And when that happens, God help anyone who walks into the Halloween hut. Because once you step through those doors, you're theirs forever. I don't think I can hold out much longer. I don't have anyone else to talk to about this. No friends, no family, no acquaintances. Just me, this damned house, and her. When I ran away with Dan, I thought everything was going to be perfect. We had grand plans to be free, to live an adventurous life, filled with passion and danger. But all of that fell apart when he died. A freak accident, they said. But there was nothing accidental about what followed. I arrived at the house just after dusk, dragging my belongings behind me. The place was smaller than I remembered, hunched beneath a sky smeared with angry storm clouds. The realtor had called it quaint, but now it looked like something out of a nightmare. The paint, once a crisp white, had rotted into strips of peeling skin, flaking off the sides like it was trying to shed its old life. The windows were coated in layers of grime, so thick you couldn't see inside. Almost as if the house itself wanted to keep you out. Or worse, keep something in. This place was supposed to be my refuge, a place to disappear, to escape the memories, to grieve. But as I stood at the entrance, staring at the decaying structure before me, I felt the air grow thick, suffocating, like the house knew I didn't belong there, like it was waiting for me. My skin prickled with unease, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. Grief does strange things to the mind. I dragged my suitcase inside, the door slamming shut behind me with a thunderous crack that echoed through the hollow rooms. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and rotting wood. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The first night passed in a haze of restless sleep, my body wrapped in Dan's old sweatshirt, his scent faint but still lingering. The wind outside howled like a wild beast, its claws scraping against the windows as if it wanted to come inside. Around midnight, I heard something, a low creak, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded as I forced myself to get out of bed and check the hallway. But there was nothing, only silence, thick, oppressive, alive. I convinced myself it was a dream. But that was just the beginning. The days blurred together in a monotonous swirl of loneliness and despair. I wandered aimlessly through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing off the walls like the house was swallowing me whole. Strange things began to happen. Small, almost insignificant at first. Objects would go missing. A spoon here, a pen there. I'd find things I knew I hadn't touched in bizarre places. My keys in the freezer, Dan's old watch on the kitchen counter. But I told myself it was just grief playing tricks on me. Until I saw her. It was the mirror that caught my attention first. I wasn't even looking at it, just passing by when something flickered at the corner of my eye. A movement. At first I thought it was my own reflection, but when I turned to face it, the image in the glass didn't match mine. My reflection just stood there, still, that staring back at me with wide, lifeless eyes. She didn't move when I did. She didn't blink. She was waiting. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. Her face, my face, contorted into something grotesque, her lips twisting into a cold, cruel smile that stretched far too wide, showing teeth that weren't mine. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the reflection didn't follow me. It stayed in the mirror, watching, grinning, daring me to come closer. I didn't. That night the voice started. At first it was soft, barely more than a whisper. But it was Dan. I knew it was him. His voice calling out from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very foundation of the house. He was trapped, he said. Trapped in the house, waiting for me to join him. The loneliness inside me screamed to believe it. I wanted to. I needed to. But the voice grew darker, more insistent. It accused me, blamed me for his death. "You left me," it would hiss, the words slithering through the cracks in the walls. "You let me die." I tried to ignore it, but the house wouldn't let me. The whispers followed me from room to room. The things that had disappeared began reappearing in strange, unnerving places. A child's doll sitting on my bed, an old photograph with the eyes scratched out, a wedding band I didn't recognize lying on the bathroom sink, and the mirror, that damned mirror. Every time I passed it, she was there, my reflection. But it wasn't me, not anymore. Her eyes tracked my movements, watching, waiting, and then she'd smile. That same sickening grin that stretched too far, as though the skin on her face was about to tear open. I tried to cover the mirror, throwing a sheet over it, but every time I returned to the room, the sheet would be on the floor, crumpled in a heap, the glass shining like it had never been touched. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. The voice never stopped. The reflection never blinked. I was unraveling, losing myself in the madness of the house. Then last night, everything changed. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The air was thick, heavy, pulsating with a life of its own. I knew without even looking that the mirror had broken. I crept into the hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath my feet. And there, standing amidst the broken shards, was her, my reflection. But she wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was standing in my house, dripping with something dark and thick. Her eyes glowed with malice, her smile stretched even wider than before. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice like nails scraping across a chalkboard. "Come be with him." I ran. But the house twisted around me, the walls bending and warping, stretching like they were alive. Her footsteps echoed behind me, sharp, quick, relentless. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck as I stumbled into the attic, slamming the door behind me. Now I'm here, huddled in the corner, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Dan's voice is calling to me. But it's not him anymore. It's her. And the mirror. The mirror is gone. But she isn't.